The day my daughter Emily told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding was the day something inside me broke. I still remember standing in my tiny kitchen, holding the phone so tightly that my hand hurt. I had spent 27 years raising her alone after her father walked away when she was only 4. I worked double shifts at a nursing home, cleaned houses on weekends, and skipped meals more times than I can count so she could have everything she needed. Yet that afternoon, she spoke to me as if I were an embarrassment. "Mom," she said, her voice cold and distant, "Jason's family is very wealthy. The wedding is going to be elegant. We don't want anything that looks out of place." I didn't understand at first. Then she explained. She didn't want me sitting near the front. She didn't want me talking to important guests. In fact, she thought it would be better if I didn't attend at all. My heart nearly stopped. I asked if she was serious. There was a long silence before she said something I will never forget. "Mom, I love you, but people judge. I don't want them knowing where I came from." When the call ended, I sat alone at my kitchen table and cried until sunset. What Emily didn't know was that her words would change both of our lives forever. For weeks after that conversation, I could barely sleep. Every corner of my small house reminded me of her childhood. The marks on the wall where I measured her height every birthday. The old piano I bought secondhand because she dreamed of taking lessons. The photographs of school plays, graduations, and birthdays. I had sacrificed everything for that girl. Yet somehow, my modest life had become something she was ashamed of. Friends encouraged me to confront her, but I refused. If my daughter wanted a wedding without me, I wouldn't beg for an invitation. On the morning of the ceremony, I stayed home. I made myself a cup of coffee and tried not to imagine her walking down the aisle. Around noon, I received dozens of social media photos. There she was in a beautiful white dress, smiling beside her wealthy husband and his family. Everyone looked happy. Everyone except me. That evening, I made a decision. Instead of spending the rest of my life feeling sorry for myself, I would finally do something for me. For the first time in decades, I stopped living for my daughter and started living for myself. A year later, my life looked completely different. I had used my savings to start a small home care business. It wasn't easy. I worked harder than ever before, often putting in 16-hour days. But unlike before, every hour was building something that belonged to me. The business slowly grew. Then it grew faster. Within 2 years, I had hired several employees and signed contracts with hospitals across the county. For the first time in my life, I was financially comfortable. Meanwhile, Emily rarely called. When she did, our conversations lasted only a few minutes. She talked about expensive vacations, luxury restaurants, and designer handbags. She never asked how I was doing. She never apologized for the wedding. Sometimes I wondered if she even realized how deeply she had hurt me. Then one evening, I heard from a mutual friend that Jason's company was struggling. Apparently, several investments had failed. I felt bad for them, but I stayed out of their affairs. After all, Emily had made it clear years ago that she no longer needed me. 3 years after the wedding, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize the woman standing there. Emily looked exhausted. Her expensive clothes were gone. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Behind her stood 2 small children I had only seen in photographs. Before I could speak, she burst into tears. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't know where else to go." I invited them inside immediately. As the children sat at the table eating cookies, Emily told me everything. Jason had lost nearly all their money. Their house had been foreclosed. Debts were piling up. Worse still, Jason had left, claiming he needed time to figure things out. She had nowhere to live and no one willing to help. The wealthy friends who once filled her wedding photos had disappeared. Suddenly, she looked less like the confident woman who rejected me and more like the frightened little girl I used to comfort after nightmares. That night, after the children fell asleep in the guest room, Emily and I sat together in silence. Finally, she looked at me and asked the question she had been avoiding all evening. "Why are you helping me?" she said. "After everything I did to you, why didn't you turn me away?" I stared at her for a moment before answering. The truth was simple. I had imagined this conversation many times. In my fantasies, I always delivered some powerful speech about karma and consequences. But sitting there looking at my daughter, I realized revenge would solve nothing. "Because I'm your mother," I said softly, "and because carrying anger for years is exhausting." Tears rolled down her face. She apologized for the wedding, for the cruel words, and for treating me like I wasn't good enough. She admitted she had spent years chasing the approval of people who never truly cared about her. By the end of the conversation, both of us were crying. Today, Emily and her children live only 10 minutes away from me. She found a stable job, rebuilt her confidence, and became the mother I always hoped she would be. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's real. Sometimes we sit on my porch drinking coffee while her children play in the yard. Every now and then, she apologizes again for what happened. I always tell her the same thing. The wedding wasn't the worst day of my life because it forced me to discover my own worth. Losing her respect pushed me to build a future I never thought possible. And perhaps most importantly, it taught both of us that money can buy luxury, but it cannot buy loyalty, love, or family. 3 years after she said I was too poor to attend her wedding, my daughter came back with nothing. What surprised her most was that the door she had closed was still open.